This is the story of a quest to capture reality, of how filmmakers gained the freedom of movement which allowed them to shoot real life on the hoof. It all happened in 1960, the dawn of a new era. Two teams of filmmakers, one in America and one in France, each developed a new camera.
It was a real revolution.
They shared the same dream of a camera that could capture life as they saw and heard it.
That was an outstanding project.
In the history of storytelling, that never happened before.
They changed the way we saw the world, factually, cinematically, and poetically.
1960, that's when everything started.
It started with a camera, and the camera changed the world.
Oh, doggy.
Richard Leacock is a giant of documentary filmmaking. His work spans its history. Today, he's 89. But in his youth, he helped invent a portable camera that sparked a revolution. The revolution happened in 1960, in France and in America, when a handful of filmmakers pioneered a new kind of documentary. They made it possible to simply pick up a camera and follow the action. They made it possible to record a person's voice in the moment. They wanted one thing, to capture the immediacy of life.
I know that I was obsessed with it. I was looking for something that gave you the feeling of being there.
In the 1950s, Leacock's dream was impossible to achieve. The problem was the equipment.
Look, it's Alexander Palace here. Can you get the silent camera up from Plymouth to St. Morgan? Now, we're going to send sound down from London. Incidentally, I'll tell these chaps to get a move on, will you?
Cameras were designed for shooting drama in a studio. They were as heavy and cumbersome as a lawnmower, so needed the support of a tripod. And there they remained.
BBC on Santosi calling Harrods. Hello, Harrods. Can you hear me?
The sound gear was even heavier than the camera, needing 2 or more men to cart it around. The result was documentaries as stilted as the equipment.
There's the country solicitor, the sort of man whose clients stop him in the street.
I've got a bit of a problem with these coach parties coming past the farm and throwing their rubbish over the hedge.
Come in and see me this afternoon at 3 o'clock, and let's see what we can do.
Much of Ukrainian folklore's quaint appeal is to be found in a favorite song of its peasant girls.
I can't.
Leacock dreamt of following the action as it happened. But the bulky camera equipment of the 50s made this impossible.
We didn't have the equipment. It didn't exist. It was hopeless. God help you if you had to move.
In 1958, a French filmmaker thought he'd found an ingenious way around the technical problems. Jean Rouch was France's leading ethnographer.
I try to make films about man, about the life of every day of the small villages where I spent weeks and weeks, months and months. In this way, I made the film Moi et Noir.
Aujourd'hui, c'est samedi et le samedi, même les manœuvres ne travaillent pas. Comment allez-vous? Ça va très bien, mon cher ami. Eh bien, aujourd'hui, ça va bien, je crois. Parce que le soir, on ne va pas travailler, c'est samedi soir.
Moi et Noir follows the lives of immigrants living on the Ivory Coast. It seemed to capture the feeling of being there that Leacock and others were after. In the late 50s, Michel Brault was another cameraman desperate to revolutionize the documentary.
Jean Rouch, he's a pioneer. I see Moi et Noir, and I'm in full discovery land now. You know, you have to realize that filmmakers were longing to see people with their sound of life, their language, their music, their rhythms. That was a very important goal.
Une femme africaine bien, qui a les fesses bien balancées, et puis avec 1000 fois, une belle plage.
Moi et Noir is full of life in a way that was extraordinary for its time. Rouch achieved this by ignoring conventional camera technology. Instead of the bulky equipment used by professionals, he shot solo with a small wind-up camera, the kind used by amateurs.
I used only a very light camera, a 16mm Bell & Howell.
With his tiny handheld camera, Rouch could follow the action wherever it took him. But the wind-up device had serious drawbacks.
You have to wind it, and the action is going on. And then you can shoot. 20 seconds, that's it.
The problem was that Rouch could only capture the world in 20-second chunks. And that wasn't all.
It makes noise. Can you record my sound? Yes, you can, but you hear the camera running. Okay? Impossible. So you don't record sound at the same time as you record the camera. It has no sound.
So the film was shot silent. Its soundtrack created after the film was edited.
Pour moi, c'est seulement le samedi soir que je suis heureux. En dehors du samedi soir, toute ma vie est troublée.
Rouch had brilliantly found a way around the limits of camera technology and made a classic film. But he knew that to really capture life on the hoof, he needed a different camera. One not yet invented. At the same time in America, by a strange coincidence, another man was about to join the revolution.
This is a head slate.
Journalist Bob Drew was working as a picture editor for Life magazine, famous for its spontaneous photo essays.
I worked with Life photographers, and with them, we could go anywhere with that little camera. Nobody would even see the camera. And we could record pictures that had emotion and power
In the 50s, Drew began wondering why these qualities were missing from documentary films.
Documentaries couldn't record the kind of drama that we were getting to capture real life and convey it.
Seeing opportunity, Drew came up with a blueprint for a new type of documentary, as dramatic as any fiction.
It would be a theater without actors. It would be plays without playwrights. It would be reporting without summary and opinion. It would be the ability to look in on people's lives at crucial times from which you could deduce certain things and see a kind of truth that can only be gotten by personal experience. A film that will put across the feeling of what it was like to be there.
Drew had ideas, but he was no filmmaker. To realize his ambitions, he knew he'd need to join forces with someone who was.
I found Richard Leacock because I saw a film that he made on television.
All right, unloosen it right here. Take it off the bag. Now, take the bag off down here. Pull it down on the sides. Clear down. That's it. All right.
Leacock had made a film about a traveling tent theater in Midwest America. It gave Drew the feeling of being there.
The way the film was made, it made you feel like you were in a tent with the show. That really knocked me out.
And we had drinks together. He came down and found me.
Over drinks, Leacock came clean with Drew. The film's spontaneity was an illusion, one involving many months of filming.
I managed to get a semblance of being there by cheating, and I cheated all over the place.
Because of the heavy equipment, Leacock had carefully choreographed every shot. Drew wanted to capture real life as it happened. Leacock explained how it was impossible with the cameras of the time.
I found out a couple of things. That anybody with ideas can't do anything because it was technically impossible.
But Drew was a man who would not admit defeat. If no portable camera existed, he'd find a way to make one. The problem was, it was going to cost a bomb.
I needed $1 million to make the equipment smaller.
Drew made Life magazine a proposition. If they gave him the money to create a new camera, he'd make gripping films that would break into the lucrative television market. In 1958, Drew got his money.
And that's how we finally got started.
Ricky Leacock was quick to point Drew in the direction of a group of co-conspirators.
Ricky was a kind of godfather. He helped guide me.
The first person he led Drew to was Don Pennybaker.
Yeah. Oh, here it is.
These days, he's seen as a founding father of American documentaries.
Wonderful.
Back then, he was a 19-year-old engineering graduate messing around with cameras.
Oh, God, you see that case is in poor shape. Okay, this is it. It's heavy. I haven't done this in so long. The equipment was still just old-fashioned equipment. Nobody had gotten the next step, but Drew came in. He had the money, and that was interesting. From then on, it was really a do-or-die effort to get a camera that would work. There must have been $1 million of that purchase order issued, and nobody was on to us, you know. There was a sense of, you know, I'll just do it if I want to.
Work on the equipment began with a critical decision: to take an existing camera and adapt it to their purposes.
The camera that we started with was the Oricon.
The Oricon was the smallest camera available, but it was still too heavy, weighing over 30 pounds.
The problem was we had these Oricons, which meant to go on a tripod. They had a little hole underneath, and you put it on a head and you cranked it. And I could see that we weren't going to use tripods, ever. The tripod was something we didn't want to have anything to do with, because you couldn't set them up, you couldn't carry them around, you couldn't deal with them.
To get a camera they could carry, the Oricon would require brutal adjustments.
He made the camera lighter by cutting off pieces of it and throwing it away.
After months of ruthless adaptation, the camera had lost a third of its weight. It was now light enough to carry, but how?
I drilled a hole in the front and threaded it, and we put that handle on the front of the camera, and that was it. When we did that, suddenly the whole thing became that, you know, the handle on the camera. I should have patented it right away, but I didn't know how to patent anything, really. But that was the thing that changed the whole camera operation to everybody could put it on their shoulder. Here they are. Well, here's the camera. Always the handle from the very start, so that we didn't put it on a tripod, we put it on our shoulder. But I just would hold the camera like this, and I learned by looking in a mirror and watching if I had exactly how to hold it to know that I was getting you, or you, or you see. And that was very helpful in many instances. And getting it on your shoulder meant it was going to be steady, because as long as you could lock the camera against your cheek and support it with your shoulder, you could shoot anything. The Oricon probably wouldn't recognize them. They'd probably disown them, actually. But they worked. They worked, and they worked in ways that you could carry them around easily. It didn't look like much. You know, it still was a pretty good camera. Well.
By early 1960, the team had transformed the Oricon into the first professional lightweight handheld camera.
This is basically an Oricon camera, which weighs at least a third. The Oricon weighs at least a third more than this, maybe half again as much. And this one has been cut down. There's probably $100,000 of special engineering in that camera alone.
Drew and his team could now go out with their new camera. And if people moved, they could follow them.
That camera took months and months to make. That camera made the revolution possible, but just barely.
At exactly the same time in France, a small group of engineers were facing the same challenge. Jean-Pierre Bourviala has had a lifelong passion for handheld cameras. He's one of the great technical innovators of camera history.
You know, every time TV team are coming here, and they ask me, would you sit? We prepared, you know, they had lamps, a stool. Please sit on that stool. And the camera was there, and the lamps and all that stuff. And I said, you are doing that to me? You know, you are doing that to me. Tu peux penser là dans le film de Scorsese. You're talking to me? You're doing that to me? And I say, no, au revoir. And I left. And I left them with their cameras. And, you know, I had invented more or less the more mobile camera in the world, through the shape of the camera, through the atom code and all that. And they want me to be on a stool. Don't make this mistake. Yeah, I think so. If I remember.
France's legendary camera manufacturer, Eclair, employed Bourviala straight out of engineering college.
Alors, I think the film is in the reverse.
He followed in the footsteps of another gifted camera inventor, Eclair's chief engineer, André Coutan. In 1960, he was on the same quest as Bob Drew, but with one major difference. Instead of adapting an existing camera, Coutan was making a new one from scratch.
He was very smart. He was a very good listener to people's requests.
Coutan learned from listening to filmmakers that standard cameras were too noisy. The cause of this was the mechanical claw that pulled the film through the camera.
The secret was in the claw movement. This claw must enter the perforation, pull down the film, and then get out, doing this. Down, out, up, in. Understood? And the way Eclair invented the silent, the quietness, is that while you are entering the perforation, you are slightly gliding. You are not going this boom, noise, like in all other cameras. It was landing like this. The claw. Okay, down, in, up, out, like this. So you only have this nice gliding noise, which is virtually noiseless. Voilà. It was a real revolution. Real revolution.
The change to this tiny part of the camera was an engineering masterstroke. It would become the foundation for a completely new camera. The prototype was designed for carrying around and weighed a mere 4 pounds. This was a major step in the camera revolution.
Portability, instant magazine, viewfinder, position on the shoulder. But the revolution was the quietness of the machine.
Back in America, Drew was under pressure. In 1960, having spent vast sums of life's money, it was time to deliver a film.
I had to find a story. But finding stories was my job at life. I knew how to do that. And I looked at the country and I looked at what was going on and what the stories were. And I liked this young senator who was running an impossible race for the presidency. I said, we won't ask you to do anything. We won't light, we won't interview you, but you'll have to let the camera be with you all day long, every day. And you can't think about the camera, you can't worry about when it's on and off. Just forget it. He thought that over for a while, and he said, are you out to get me? And I said, no. He said, if I don't call you tomorrow, we're on. He didn't call me. We went to Wisconsin and made primary.
He's got what all the rest lack. Everyone wants to back. Jack is on the right track.
Primary follows the story of a young senator's campaign to win the Wisconsin Democratic primary, the first stage of the race for the presidency. The candidate was John F. Kennedy, a millionaire outsider from the East Coast. Drew's team were about to make filmmaking history.
You are having a wonderful time.
primary was filmed in just 4 days with 4 two-man crews.
Ricky was shooting with the new camera that had been silenced and made smaller and so forth.
I'm Richard Leacock. This camera is as light, quiet, and portable as we can make it.
Drew was recording sound with an early portable recorder. Another young filmmaker, Albert Maisels, had joined the team. Like Pennebaker, he would become one of the great documentary cameramen of his time.
Pennebaker, Leacock, and Drew were about to do something revolutionary in filmmaking, and it'd be great if I came on board.
Pennebaker and Maisel were shooting with Airflexes, just regular cameras. They made a racket.
We had Terry Filgate, who was terrific.
The final man to join was Terry McCartney Filgate, an ace cameraman from the Canadian Film Board.
So I was fortunate to have really good cameramen who were gung-ho.
There was just one rule: follow the unfolding action. That meant no tripods. If someone moved, the camera would go with them.
When you see primary, you feel that you're in the shoes of JFK, Jackie.
The films had such a sense of freedom, being in a real place with real people. We weren't directing people. They were doing it for a huge audience, and we just were getting what the audience got. That was very exciting.
I was really able to get close to Jackie. And I walk around back and get her hands, which were going like this, because it was the only thing by which you knew that she was nervous.
You try to be witness to all of the driving forces of a story, so that later when you edit it and put it together, you have the material. That's just like the material you'd have from actors if you were doing it with actors. It's no different, really.
Like in that wonderful scene where I held the camera from up high down onto the back of Kennedy's head.
One of the most remarkable shots in primary shows the power of the approach that Drew and his team were pioneering. This 85-second shot reveals Kennedy's star power. This could never have been understood without seeing it in real time, as it happened.
Up to now, all presidents were old farts. And suddenly here's a young guy who might be president. That was sort of interesting. You kind of wanted to hear him and see him as a person and not as a sort of a public aperture.
It was the newly adapted Oricon used by Leacock, with Drew recording dialogue, that really went beyond the public figure to reveal Kennedy, the man.
There's Ricky. Get him? That's my little Ricky Poos with his big ears. Okay, on we go.
In this scene, the Oricon faced its first test.
In the middle of the first day, John Kennedy jumped out of the car, ran into a photographer's studio, and sat down and posed for a photographer. Ricky and I were right with him. Went through the doorway, shot everything that happened, and we stopped and looked at each other and grinned. This was the first time. This was what we dreamed of forever.
That time to smile yet, Wally.
It was the feeling of being there. It wasn't telling you what it was just showing it.
It was the first moment when we really fastened on a character, went through a doorway, into a room, shot what happened, came back out. It exercised all the difficult things to be done to shoot, and it worked.
987.
It was with the Oricon that Leacock captured one of the film's most powerful moments. On the last day of filming, his camera was in Kennedy's private suite as he awaited the final result.
One question. What did Nixon do in the 4th and 5th? In the 4th and 5th, give me Nixon.
Leacock got the whole thing.
There's the microphone. And you see it in the ashtray.
Thanks a million for calling. About the second. Yeah. The ninth is gone. The third we have a chance in. But just a chance. It really depends on the cross. The 10th we have a chance in. That's right. Just a chance. The 7th. Yeah, I guess they. Hi. How are you? Glad to see you. Well, we'll see what happens. 27 for Jack. 92 for Humphrey.
20 and a half to 10 and a half would be a 2-to-1 victory for Jack on Gallagher. It'd be a great victory, actually. We didn't want to say to the people.
Kennedy won the Wisconsin primary and moved on, taking his campaign to other states. But Drew and his team were going nowhere. As they began cutting their material in a makeshift edit suite, their problems had only just begun. Watching their footage, they feared their new method had failed to deliver a film. None of the sound recorded by Drew matched the images they'd shot.
All of the stuff that Drew had done on his tape recorder, none of it was in sync.
The problem was that Drew's tape recorder ran at a different speed to Leacock's adapted Oricon. This meant that all the voices, though recorded, weren't perfectly synchronized with the pictures.
He shall determine what shall be our policy on Berlin. He shall determine whether we shall.
Even the slightest breakdown in sync is painfully obvious on the screen.
And I run for the presidency because, like you, I have strong ideas about what this country must do.
A huge job now faced the team. Every spoken word had to be synchronized to the image of the person speaking.
I had to set up the way of getting it to be able to be in sync. So I had to set up this transfer arrangement in this hotel room.
Pennebaker devised a machine that would adjust the speed of the sound to lock it in sync with the pictures.
He sat there for weeks turning that crank, with all of us behind him saying, no, turn it to the left, no, turn it to the right, turn it faster.
The problem was that it could vary. It could go in and out, and you couldn't keep track of it, so it would drive you nuts. But we all sat there. It made one for all of us. Even for Al, who never edits. Al just grinds it through and looks at it over and over again. He didn't. Editing is not interesting to him.
Every night we collapsed on the floor of the hotel without even getting into bed, without even getting undressed, you know.
For Drew, the pressure to overcome the technical problems was intense.
About 3 weeks into the editing, I went blind. I couldn't see. Maisels had to lead me around to a chair and so forth. And I thought, well, it's finally happened, you know. I finally broke under the strain. Well, it turned out I'd broken for a day. I got my sight back the next day.
He shall determine what shall be our policy on
After weeks of work, they managed to sync up people's voices. But some scenes escaped them.
And I run for the presidency.
In primary, you'll see some scenes that are out of sync.
Now, anybody I didn't get, because I guess we're late. Yeah, who's it there?
You can hear that thing straining to get voice into sync.
That's because we were just too tired to synchronize that last scene. Anyway, we were able to synchronize enough to make a primary.
While Kennedy went on to make history, documentaries would never be the same again. Leacock, with an adapted Oricon on his shoulder, had given birth to the Fly on the Wall documentary. That was April 1960 in Wisconsin. But in May, in Paris, another new camera was about to turn over. A bunch of intellectuals and filmmakers were soon to embark on a major film production. The director was France's most famous ethnographic filmmaker, Jean Rouch, the man behind the groundbreaking Moi Noir.
Last spring, one of my friends asked me a very embarrassing question. He said, "Why are you always making film in Africa? Maybe we can try to make another film here in Paris. An anthropological film in Paris, in the Paris jungle. Savage people in Paris."
Chronique d'un été was an experiment in documentary filmmaking that set out to explore the lives of ordinary Parisians and follow them over a summer. It was a collaborative effort. Marceline Loridin-Ivens was one of the film's protagonists. She also helped out behind the scenes.
Il y avait tout un courant de descendre dans la rue et de tenir compte des gens normaux qui vivaient leur vie. J'étais à la fois assistante sur ce film et protagoniste également. Voilà.
At the start of filming, they shot with a standard camera that weighed over 40 pounds. Too heavy to carry, it had to be put on a tripod. Rouch soon became frustrated by a familiar problem: the restrictive and bulky equipment.
Il faut qu'il y ait des gens qui aient le courage de se lancer dans un vrai cinéma, de montrer que l'on peut filmer des gens n'importe où, dans n'importe quelle condition, et prendre tous les risques.
A few weeks into the shoot, Rouch got a message from Eclair's chief engineer, André Couton. He'd just produced a prototype for a new kind of camera. It was portable, and it was silent. Would Rouch like to try it on Chronique d'un été?
Tout d'un coup, l'arrivée de la caméra éclair qui rendait le cinéma beaucoup plus facile, un style d'image, de plan séquence, de liberté, de descendre dans la rue avec.
But Rouch needed a cameraman equally obsessed with handheld cameras. A man like Michel Brault.
J'ai demandé à Michel Brault, je lui ai demandé de venir à Paris pour essayer d'expérimenter ensemble le problème de la prise de vue et de la prise de son avec une caméra portative.
So, I go as fast as I can, I'm there. I arrive in Paris, and Jean puts in my hand a camera designed by André Couton from the Maison Éclair. First camera that I have in my hands that can shoot out in the open without a tripod, and it's light, it's silent.
With Couton's prototype, Brault's handheld skills, and Rouch's desire to experiment, the camera moved from the dinner table into the streets.
What was exciting is that we could finally shoot in the streets, in the houses, without bringing a huge camera. There's no difference between life and shooting.
One of the first to see the impact of this handheld style was the film's editor, Nena Baratier.
Jean Rouch a fait venir Michel Brault parce qu'il était collé à la personne qui filmait, le plus près des gens qui filmaient. Il avait une souplesse, même dans sa démarche, dans son corps. Il voulait coller aux gens.
All the handheld material was shot by me.
Having the camera on the shoulder and walking with that, with like a tiger, you know. There is a special dance, you know. You have to put your legs like this. Yeah, that is the trick. You cannot walk like that, you know. No, you didn't know that? He had to invent the dance with the camera, with the cat.
C'est ça l'événement. C'est la première fois qu'avec sa caméra, on a pu filmer l'intimité.
Brault filmed a factory worker as he wakes and is brought breakfast by his mum, capturing a tender moment in everyday life.
Jean wanted the camera to see the people, the French people, in their homes.
Ils ont pu exprimer ça pour la première fois.
It's all these new techniques that made it possible to go behind the official aspect of people.
The French fell in love with having the freedom to follow real life. But as the camera developed, Rouch wanted to push its role further. In one scene, he asked Nadine Ballot and Marceline to collude with the camera to ambush reality.
Madame, s'il vous plaît. Maintenant, je fatigue déjà beaucoup, alors là... Est-ce que vous êtes heureux, monsieur?
Oh, me parlez pas de tout ça.
Si vous prenez des cartes ou...
Wesh. Non, aucune philosophie, oh là là, non.
Je suis en train de dire ça.
Parce que moi, j'ai revu Chronique d'un été, je suis donc allée au Forum des images pour le revoir. Tu étais là planté sur tes jolies jambes avec des talons et tout ça magnifique, et avec ton grand cou, tu es belle comme tout d'ailleurs. Et alors tu avais dit, alors monsieur, est-ce que vous êtes heureux?
Monsieur, s'il vous plaît, êtes-vous heureux? On m'a dit, qu'est-ce que ça peut vous foutre?
Il y a un type qui te répond, oh, foutez-moi la paix avec ça. Toi, tu te laisses pas du tout laisser intimider. Alors que moi, j'étais désespérée en me disant, oh là là, quelle horreur.
S'il vous plaît, êtes-vous heureux? N'ayez pas peur, on ne veut pas vous faire de mal.
Et toi, imperturbable, tu faisais parler les gens.
Heureuse de vivre, malgré que j'ai 60 ans.
Vous avez 60 ans?
Oui, et que je fais 20 km tous les jours pour venir travailler à Paris.
Ce film a joué un rôle dans nos vies. On était innocents, on ne savait rien du cinéma.
Les documentaires, avant, c'était extérieur. Le réalisateur et l'opérateur étaient toujours extérieurs au sujet. Là, ils étaient en communion. C'est ça la grande différence, à mon avis.
Bon, alors, la question, c'est de savoir si on a trouvé quelque chose, si on a découvert quelque chose autour enfin, des vérités.
Sans doute des petits moments de vérité.
Oui.
There were laws of filmmaking, but John said the laws and, you know,
After Chronique d'un été, the rules of filmmaking lay in tatters. With the Eclair prototype, Rouch had shown that a handheld camera could bring real life to the screen. Rouche's camera had probed deeper into the lives of ordinary people than any one before. By the end of 1960, there were 2 films, one in France and one in America, each made with a revolutionary new camera.
It's a pivotal date, 1960. That's when everything started.
But the films had something else in common. Like the Americans with primary, Rouche had failed to record sound that synchronized with his pictures. The reason was that portable sound recorders were unpredictable. It was Swiss engineering that solved this problem.
12.
In Switzerland, a new kind of portable tape recorder was invented. It was run by a precise motor which played back sound at exactly the same speed it was recorded. It was the brainchild of Stefan Kudelski. He called his new device the Nagra.
Stefan Kudelski is one of the best engineers I have ever met. Being in optic, mechanical, design, he is really a genius, Stefan Kudelski. And we fell in love of each other, you know. He was a real master.
Kudelski's genius was to discover that the answer to synchronous sound lay in clocks.
That is the first time this lady is wearing a Longines.
Inside this watch is a quartz crystal. It emits a precise electrical pulse, the most accurate in the world. This was the secret to the Nagra's precision. It too had a quartz crystal controlling its motor, making it as reliable as the camera.
And the crystal is the reference. You know, the crystal beats at a very, very high precision. So it means that after 10 minutes, you have the same signal in the camera and in the recorder. Simple.
In late 1960, the Americans took delivery of their first Nagra.
White doggy.
Now they were armed with a new handheld camera. With a Nagra recording sound in sync with it, nothing could stop the revolution. One of the first films on which they used this combination was Yankee Nub. Filmed after Castro had swept to power in Cuba, Drew and his team went to document the political and social turmoil erupting in Latin America.
There was one wonderful moment when there was a big meeting. Everybody from all the various states was there.
This tense meeting between the US and Latin American states was filmed by Leacock and recorded by Drew.
There was the American Secretary of State.
Can you hear me now?
And Raul Roa, Cuban emissary at the UN.
I rejected completely and utterly the allegations made in this resolution by the Cuban government. I'm going to say no more, and we'll be glad to have the vote taken on this resolution.
There came this fantastic moment, and the entire Cuban delegation got up and walked out, and Ricky with his camera walked right out with him. So we got them walking in the streets, singing and going down. All the others, you could see them all set with their big tripods. They couldn't move. That's what you could do with a camera that you could carry.
With the Hurricane and Nagra, they captured the radical decade of 60s America. In their films, you hear real voices as you watch the unfolding stories. They followed the drama of a lawyer's fight to save a man facing death by electric chair.
The second doctor and the third doctor. They proceed around and then they give you your findings. You turn to them, all three agree, you walk out and pronounce the man dead.
As he said to the 5 victims whose skulls were bashed in, I'm sorry I treated you, my former employees, that way.
We got to make interesting films. We got to prove a lot of our points.
They captured the extreme reaction to the desegregation of white schools in the Deep South.
We feel that this is a communist front movement pushing these colored people to try and destroy our nation.
Because that's what they are, niggas. We gave those niggas all what they got. We are the white people. They are the Negroes. And I mean, he said Negroes, and if I'd have been him, I'd have said niggas.
It's the most frightening situation I've ever been in. When a crowd is after you. It was scary as hell.
The films reveal pivotal moments of American history, but for the television networks, they seem shockingly raw.
It was like what we were doing was some sort of thievery, that it wasn't really television and we were pretending it was, or something. I don't know what they really thought.
We were never accepted by television in America. None of our stuff was showed.
It turned out that the networks were never going to be able to make these films like these.
I wanted it to be total theater, and TV was never going to go that way. TV was just going to sell soap as fast as it could.
In 1963, Drew gained unrivaled access to the most famous man in America. But the television networks still weren't interested.
One of them said, "You've got some good footage there, Bob." And without a narration and a correspondent, they didn't see the story.
They didn't want to have any part of it. They didn't even want to see us.
They wanted to be as far away from it as they could get.
In 1963, Drew and his original team of filmmakers went their separate ways. Their ambitions too big for television. In France, it was a different story. At Eclair, the prototype evolved into a fully developed professional camera made by engineers for the mass market. In 1963, it was released with huge success as the Eclair NPR.
So that's the Eclair that made most of the cinema verite in the world. It was a very popular camera. I even think that for 1 year, it was the biggest exportation of France. Biggest item of exportation in France. They conquered the whole world with this.
By the end of the 60s, the Eclair was the world's most popular handheld camera. The Oricon remained the tool of a handful of art house documentary filmmakers, but the Eclair conquered the world.
Mais je pense qu'il y a d'autres raisons d'être heureux dans la vie que de faire des caméras, franchement dit. Hein. Donc, modestie, modestie. Voilà. Au revoir.
Boviala may caution modesty, but since the invention of the handheld camera, the world has never looked the same.
Wish there were a rich man.
The camera changed the world, but it wasn't really the camera. It was the idea that changed the world.
From the 60s onwards, the handheld camera became witness to a rapidly changing world, capturing history as it happened.
We could see the people running everywhere. It was fantastic.
Documentaries could now take their audiences into places that were previously inaccessible.
You can see him because I filmed it. That never happened before. In the history of whatever it is, of storytelling, that was never possible before. That's something so amazing that should take place. I feel lucky to have lived during that period.
Don Pennebaker and Al Maisels went on to make classic cinema documentaries. Drew, Leacock, Brault, and Rouche also went on to make films, each true to the spirit of their early ambitions. The handheld camera gave us a window on the world, but it would also give us something else. As time went on, this window on the world became our window on the past.
Et c'est ça la caméra, cette caméra. De pouvoir immortaliser, conserver tous ces moments rares et qui peuvent disparaître. Tous ces moments qu'on vit là, toutes les deux par exemple, il sera unique et on ne le retrouvera jamais.
Well, I've looked at these films so many times. It's just part of my life.